Bali might be the most misunderstood island in the world. Because if you only see the beaches and resorts, you're missing what actually makes this place so unique. And once you understand what's really behind it, everything about Bali starts to feel completely different. So first, we'll look at a few fascinating facts that explain it, and then we'll explore the most incredible places across the island. Bali isn't just different from other islands. In many ways, it feels like it follows its own rules. Because geographically, this island sits right on the edge of something called the Wallace Line, a boundary that separates two completely different ecosystems. On one side, you have Asian wildlife. On the other, species that evolved in isolation closer to Australia, and Bali sits right in between. That's why you don't find animals here the way you might expect in a tropical destination. No large predators, no big mammals roaming the forests. Instead, the island feels quieter, more balanced. But that balance isn't accidental. Bali lies on the Pacific Ring of Fire, one of the most active volcanic zones on Earth. Underneath the island, tectonic plates are constantly shifting, building pressure, reshaping the land over time. And that pressure has created something unexpected. The soil here is incredibly fertile, so fertile that rice can be grown multiple times a year, something that's not possible in most parts of the world. But what's really interesting is how this is managed. Instead of individual farms, Bali uses a cooperative system called Subak, which dates back over 1,000 years. Water from the mountains is carefully distributed through a network of canals and terraces, controlled not just by farmers, but by temples. Yes, temples. Because in Bali, agriculture isn't just practical, it's spiritual. And once you notice that connection, you start to see it everywhere. Religion here isn't something separate from daily life. It's built into it. Every morning, small offerings called Kanang Sari are placed outside homes, shops, and even on motorbikes. They're made from palm leaves, flowers, rice, simple things. But they're everywhere, and they're not random. Each one is a quiet act of balance between humans and nature, between the visible world and something beyond it. Which also explains something that surprises a lot of people. Bali is one of the only places in the world where good and evil are not seen as opposites. They're seen as forces that need to exist together. And that idea shapes everything, from ceremonies to architecture, even to the way statues look. Some of them are intentionally intimidating. Sharp teeth, bulging eyes, fierce expressions, but they're not there to scare people. They're there to keep balance, and this balance becomes even more visible during one particular day. Once a year, the entire island shuts down. No flights, no cars, no lights. Even the airport closes. It's a day called Naipi, the Balinese New Year, and for 24 hours, everything goes completely silent. Imagine that. An island that normally feels alive with movement, suddenly stopping entirely. And here's the reason why. The silence is meant to trick evil spirits into thinking the island is empty, so they leave it alone. It sounds almost unreal, but it actually happens every year. And if you happen to be there during that time, you're not allowed to leave your hotel, not even to go outside. But this idea of silence also reveals something else. Bali isn't built around speed. Even though it's one of the most visited islands in the world, life here often moves slower than you'd expect. Ceremonies can last for hours. Traffic doesn't follow strict rules. Time feels flexible. And that can feel chaotic at first. But then something shifts. Because instead of trying to control everything, the island seems to flow with it. And that connection to nature runs deeper than it first appears. Bali receives around 2,000 millimeters of rainfall each year. That's roughly 79 inches, most of it during the wet season. This constant cycle of rain and sun is what keeps the landscape so intensely green. But it also creates challenges: flooding, landslides, unpredictable weather patterns. And yet, the island has adapted to it over centuries. Homes are built differently. Villages are structured around both practical and spiritual needs. Even the direction buildings face can have meaning. Nothing is placed randomly. And this attention to detail extends even to something you wouldn't expect: names. In Bali, many people share the same first names. Based on birth order, the firstborn is often Wayan, the second maid, the third Nyoman, and the fourth Kedet. Then it repeats. So you could meet multiple people with the exact same name in the same village, which might sound confusing. But it's actually part of a system that values community over individuality. And that idea is everywhere. From how people farm, to how they celebrate, to how they see the world around them. So by now, it starts to make sense. Why Bali feels different. Why it's more than just beaches and resorts. Because what you're seeing on the surface is only part of the story. And once you begin to notice what's underneath it, the landscapes, the temples, the villages, they all start to feel connected in a way that's hard to explain at first. But that connection becomes much clearer once you start moving across the island. At first glance, it looks like a temple floating on water. Set on the calm surface of Lake Beratan, about 1,200 meters above sea level, that's roughly 3,900 feet, Ulun Danu Beratan Temple sits in one of the coolest regions of the island. Often surrounded by mist that drifts across the mountains. But there's a reason this place feels so different. Built in the 17th century, the temple is dedicated to Dewi Danu, the goddess of water and lakes. And here, water isn't just part of the scenery, it's essential for life across much of Bali. The lake you're looking at helps supply irrigation to entire regions further south, feeding rice fields miles away. That's why this temple isn't just symbolic. For centuries, farmers have depended on this exact source, making this one of the most important spiritual sites tied directly to survival. And if you look closely, the multi-tiered shrine, called a meru, rises in 11 levels, each one representing a different layer of the spiritual world. And just a short drive away, the scenery changes in a way that's impossible to ignore. Just a few minutes away from the lake, Handara Gate stands at around 1,200 meters above sea level, about 3,900 feet, surrounded by cool mountain air and dense green hills. Originally, this wasn't built as a tourist attraction at all. It's the entrance to a golf resort, designed in traditional Balinese style to symbolize the passage from the outside world into something more peaceful. But the reason it became so famous is surprisingly simple: the symmetry. Two perfectly mirrored stone structures split down the middle, with a narrow road disappearing into the mountains. Early in the morning, when fog starts rolling through the valley, the entire scene changes. The background fades, the gate becomes the focus, and suddenly it feels much larger than it actually is. And as the road continues deeper into the hills, it leads toward a landscape where the sound of water slowly takes over. Hidden between steep green slopes, the temperature drops and the air feels heavier. Reaching Banyumala Twin Waterfalls takes a bit of effort. A short trek down a forest path leads through thick vegetation, with the sound of water getting louder with every step. And then it opens up. Two streams of water fall side by side from a height of about 35 meters. That's around 115 feet, creating a natural pool below. Unlike many waterfalls on the island, this one feels more secluded. Fewer crowds, softer light, and water that's clear enough to see straight to the bottom. But what makes it stand out isn't just the view, it's the setting. The surrounding cliffs are covered in dense greenery, almost closing in around the falls, creating a kind of natural amphitheater. But this is only a smaller preview of what's waiting further north. Tucked into a remote valley in northern Bali, Sekumpul Waterfall is often considered the most impressive on the island. And once you see it, that's not hard to understand. Multiple waterfalls, some over 80 meters high, which is about 260 feet, cascade down a cliff covered in jungle. Some fall in thin streams, others in powerful bursts, all meeting at the same base far below. But here's what most people don't expect. There isn't just one waterfall. There are several, each slightly different, spread across the cliff like a natural formation rather than a single drop. And depending on the season, the volume changes dramatically, sometimes turning it into a roaring wall of water. Standing there, you start to realize how much scale matters. Because from a distance, it looks almost calm. But up close, the force is impossible to ignore. Tucked away in a narrow valley, Leke Waterfall doesn't announce itself the way larger waterfalls do. The walk down is short, but it leads through dense jungle, across small bamboo bridges, and into a space that feels surprisingly enclosed. And then you see it. A single narrow stream of water drops from around 30 meters, that's close to 100 feet, straight down into a shallow pool. It's not the biggest waterfall on the island, not even close. But that's not the point. What makes it different is the shape. The rock walls curve inward, almost forming a natural tunnel, with vines and plants hanging down from above. But as the road continues away from the jungle, the scale shifts dramatically, from something hidden and enclosed to landscapes that stretch as far as you can see. From above, it almost looks like a giant green staircase, spreading across rolling hills in central Bali. Jatiluwih rice terraces cover more than 600 hectares. That's about 1,500 acres, making them some of the largest and most expansive rice terraces on the island. And unlike smaller, more visited areas, this place feels open. Wide paths run along the edges, giving you uninterrupted views across the valleys, with layers of rice fields following the natural contours of the land. Depending on the season, the colors shift from bright green to golden yellow, completely changing the look of the landscape. But there's something else that stands out. These terraces aren't just scenic, they're still actively used. Farmers move through the fields throughout the day, maintaining the narrow walls and managing water levels by hand. It's a slow process, but one that has worked here for centuries. And if you look closely, you'll notice small channels cutting through the terraces, guiding water from one level to the next with surprising precision. From a distance, it all looks effortless, but up close, it's clear how much control is involved. And just a bit further along, the terrain narrows again, not into farmland, but into a path that winds through the landscape itself. Running along a narrow ridge just outside Ubud, Campuhan Ridge Walk stretches for about 2 kilometers. That's roughly 1.2 miles, cutting between two valleys covered in tall grass and scattered palm trees. There are no barriers, no dramatic structures, just a path. But that's exactly what makes it stand out. Because as you walk, the views open up on both sides, with the terrain dropping away into green valleys below. Early in the morning, or late in the afternoon, the light hits the grass at an angle, creating a soft glow that changes every few minutes. And the further you go, the quieter it gets. Shops and traffic disappear behind you, replaced by wind and distant sounds from the valley. It's not a long walk, but it feels like a transition from the busier parts of Bali into something slower. But not far from here, the same idea of shaping land takes on a completely different form. The terraces here are tighter, layered almost on top of each other, creating a dense pattern that feels more dramatic from above. Narrow paths wind between the levels, sometimes just wide enough for one person, with drops on either side that make you pay attention to every step. And the angles matter, because from certain viewpoints, the terraces seem to fold into themselves, creating that iconic look you've probably seen countless times. But what most people don't expect is how physical it is. Climbing up and down these paths, especially in the heat, quickly turns into a workout. And all around you, farmers are doing the same thing, just as part of their daily routine. It's controlled, but not easy. And just a few minutes away, that sense of control gives way to something far less predictable. Tall trees filter the light, the air is cooler, and the paths seem easy to follow. But inside Sacred Monkey Forest Sanctuary, things can change quickly. This protected area covers about 12.5 hectares, that's roughly 30 acres, and is home to more than 1,000 long-tailed macaques. At first, they seem relaxed, even curious. But they're not just part of the scenery. They're used to people, which means they'll come closer than you expect. Bags, sunglasses, even water bottles can suddenly become targets. And while most interactions are harmless, it's clear who's really in control here. But the forest itself is just as interesting. Ancient temple structures are hidden among the trees, some dating back to the 14th century, covered in moss and surrounded by statues that almost blend into the jungle. Stone staircases lead deeper into the area, crossing small streams and opening into quiet courtyards. It feels layered, not just a forest, not just a temple, but something in between. But the next stop isn't hidden in greenery. It's carved directly into stone. From the outside, it doesn't look particularly large. But step inside Goa Gajah, and the atmosphere shifts immediately. The entrance itself is the first clue. A carved stone face, its mouth forming the doorway, as if you're walking into something alive. Built around the 9th century, this site has both Hindu and Buddhist influences, which is rare for Bali. Inside, the cave is surprisingly small, just a few meters deep, about 15 feet. But the area outside tells a different story. Stone fountains line a bathing pool nearby, with water flowing continuously through carved spouts. These were used for ritual purification, and they're still active today. And from here, the journey continues into places where water isn't just part of the experience. At first, it looks like a simple series of pools. Clear water flows continuously through stone spouts at Tirta Temple, a site that dates back to the 10th century. Located near the village of Tampaksering, about 15 kilometers, that's roughly 9 miles, from Ubud, this is one of the most important water temples on the island. People line up along the edge, moving slowly from one fountain to the next, and there's a very specific order. Each spout has a different meaning, and locals follow a sequence that's been passed down for generations. Some are used for purification, others for blessings. A few are avoided entirely, reserved for specific rituals. At first, it can seem repetitive. Water, step forward, water again. What's easy to miss is how focused it becomes. Everyone moves at the same pace. No rushing, no shortcuts. Just a quiet rhythm that continues throughout the day. And the water itself comes from a natural spring beneath the temple, flowing constantly into the pools, which explains why this place has never really been still. And just a short distance away, that same movement becomes louder, faster, and far less controlled. Tegenungan Waterfall is one of the most accessible waterfalls on the island. There's no long trek through the jungle this time. A series of steps leads down directly to the base, and that changes the experience completely. Because here, the scale hits you immediately. Water drops from around 25 meters, about 80 feet, into a wide pool below, sending mist into the air that you can feel as you get closer. The flow is strong year-round, though it becomes especially powerful during the rainy season. But the surroundings matter just as much. Unlike more remote waterfalls, this one is framed by cliffs that open up above you, letting in more light. That's why it feels brighter, more open, almost more intense. And the closer you get, the harder it is to ignore the force behind it, which makes what comes next feel completely different. Perched on the rim of a massive volcanic crater, Kintamani sits at around 1,500 meters above sea level. That's nearly 5,000 feet, offering one of the widest views in Bali. And it's not just a viewpoint. You're looking into a caldera that spans about 13 kilometers. That's roughly 8 miles across. Inside it, a lake curves along the base, while volcanic peaks rise sharply above it. Villages sit along the edges, fields stretch across the slopes, and the entire area is shaped by past eruptions that carved out this massive space over thousands of years. But here's what stands out. Even with all that scale, life continues right in the middle of it. Farms, homes, roads, everything exists within this volcanic landscape, adapting to it rather than avoiding it. And standing here, looking down into the crater, you start to notice something else. One peak rises higher than the rest. Most people begin the climb around 2 a.m., moving up the slopes of Mount Batur with only headlamps lighting the path. The summit sits at about 1,717 meters. That's roughly 5,633 feet, and the hike usually takes around 2 hours, depending on the pace. At first, it feels repetitive. Loose volcanic gravel, steady incline, step after step. What keeps people going isn't the climb itself, it's the timing. Because reaching the top just before sunrise changes everything. As the sky slowly brightens, the entire caldera begins to appear below. Lake, villages, and distant peaks coming into view all at once. And then there's something most people don't expect: steam. In certain areas near the summit, heat still escapes from the ground. Guides sometimes place eggs or bananas into the vents, letting the volcanic heat cook them in minutes. It's subtle, but real. A reminder that this mountain is still active. From a distance, it dominates the entire horizon. Mount Agung rises to about 3,031 meters. That's nearly 9,944 feet, making it the highest point on the island. On clear days, it can be seen from almost anywhere, often appearing above the clouds. But getting closer reveals a different side. This isn't just a mountain. It's considered the most sacred point in Bali. The slopes are steep, the terrain more rugged than what you've seen before, and the climb to the summit is far more demanding. It can take 6 to 8 hours just to reach the top, often starting late at night to arrive by sunrise. And unlike smaller peaks, the conditions here can change quickly. Wind, temperature, visibility, it all shifts as you go higher. What stands out, though, is the presence of something built directly on its slopes. A structure that doesn't try to compete with the mountain, but instead follows its form. And as you move closer, it becomes clear why this location was chosen. Spread across multiple levels on the side of the mountain, Besakih Temple is the largest temple complex in Bali. It sits at around 1,000 meters above sea level. That's roughly 3,300 feet, aligned directly with the slopes behind it. At first, it doesn't look like a single temple. It's a collection of over 80 individual shrines and structures, connected by stairways and courtyards that climb upward in stages. Each level reveals a slightly different perspective, with the mountain always present in the background, and that alignment isn't accidental. The entire complex is designed in relation to the mountain itself, with the main temple positioned along a central axis that points directly toward the summit. But here's something that adds another layer. In 1963, a major eruption sent lava flows down the mountain, destroying nearby villages. The temple remained largely untouched. Whether by chance or something else, it's a detail that's often mentioned by locals. Walking through the complex, the scale becomes more apparent, not just in size, but in how the space is arranged. And from here, the landscape begins to open again. At first, it feels almost too calm. Wide valleys stretch out in every direction, with rice fields, palm trees, and small villages scattered across the landscape. Sidemen Valley sits in eastern Bali, about 40 kilometers. That's roughly 25 miles from Ubud. And compared to busier areas, it feels noticeably slower. There are no large attractions here pulling crowds in one direction. Instead, everything is spread out. Narrow roads wind through the valley, passing by traditional houses, small temples, and open fields where farmers work throughout the day. And above it all, the outline of a massive volcano rises in the distance, often partially hidden by clouds. What makes this place different isn't one specific viewpoint. It's the consistency. The same kind of scenery continues for miles, changing slightly as you move through it. One village blends into another, each with its own rhythm but the same underlying structure. And the longer you stay, the more you start to notice details you would normally overlook. At first, it looks like a simple doorway. Two tall stone pillars stand on either side, framing the view behind them at Lempuyang Temple. This site has become one of the most recognizable images of Bali, but the reality is slightly different from what you might expect. There's no actual gate connecting the two sides, just an opening. And that's exactly what creates the effect. From the right angle, with the mountain in the background, the frame feels almost symmetrical. Early in the morning, when clouds move through the area, the view changes minute by minute. The full temple complex involves a climb of over 1,700 steps, around 5,600 feet of elevation gain, leading to higher shrines further up the mountain. And from here, the route begins to descend again, towards something built not on a slope, but around water at the edge of the island. It's a series of pools, pathways, and pavilions arranged around open space and water. Taman Ujung Water Palace lies near the eastern coast of Bali, with the ocean just a short distance away. Built in the early 20th century by the King of Karangasm, the complex was designed as a place for relaxation and ceremonies. Large pools reflect the surrounding structures, while stone bridges connect different sections, creating multiple vantage points as you move through the area. At first, it feels very open. Wide paths, low buildings, and clear lines of sight. But then you start to notice how everything is arranged. Each platform, each staircase, each viewpoint is positioned to guide how you experience the space. From certain angles, the surrounding hills and the distant ocean come into view at the same time. And that combination changes the atmosphere. Because here, the focus isn't just on what's built, but also on what surrounds it. And as you move closer to the coast, the landscape shifts again, from controlled spaces into something shaped entirely by the sea. At first, it doesn't look dramatic at all. A quiet stretch of coastline, small fishing boats pulled onto the shore, and a line of dark sand shaped by volcanic rock. Amed Coast runs along the northeastern edge of the island for about 14 kilometers, that's roughly 9 miles, and compared to other coastal areas, it feels almost overlooked. And that's exactly what makes it interesting, because just offshore, the landscape changes completely. Coral reefs sit close to the surface, sometimes only a few meters, around 10 feet below, making this one of the easiest places to access marine life without diving. In certain spots, you can walk straight into the water and start snorkeling within seconds. But there's something else here: the view. From the coastline, the outline of a massive volcano rises directly behind the village, creating a rare combination of ocean and mountain in the same frame. And as the light shifts, the contrast becomes even stronger. But the next stop brings the focus back to something built, placed right where land meets the ocean, in a way that feels almost deliberate. Tanah Lot Temple stands on a rocky outcrop just offshore, surrounded by waves that cut it off from the mainland for most of the day. Located about 20 kilometers, that's roughly 12 miles, from Denpasar, it's one of the most photographed temples in Bali. But timing changes everything here. At low tide, a narrow path appears, allowing people to walk across to the base of the rock. Small caves at the bottom are said to be guarded by sea snakes, which locals believe protect the temple from negative forces. At first, it feels like a simple coastal viewpoint, but then you notice how the structure is positioned. The temple sits directly against the horizon, with the ocean stretching out behind it, creating a clean, uninterrupted background. Especially during sunset, when the entire scene shifts in color. And that's when it becomes clear why this location was chosen. Not for height, not for scale, but for contrast. And just further along the coast, that contrast becomes more vertical. Uluwatu Temple sits on top of limestone cliffs about 70 meters high. That's roughly 230 feet, overlooking the open Indian Ocean. Located at the southern tip of Bali, the view here isn't just wide, it's exposed. There's nothing blocking the horizon, and the wind makes that clear. Strong, constant, and sometimes unpredictable, it adds to the sense of height as you walk along the cliffside paths. The temple itself dates back to at least the 11th century, though much of what you see today has been restored over time. But there's another detail you notice quickly: monkeys. Similar to the forest earlier, they move freely through the area, often getting closer than expected, especially near viewpoints. And then there's the timing again, because in the evening, crowds gather for the sunset, watching the light drop directly into the ocean. From above, it looks like just another stretch of coastline. But follow the narrow path down, and Padang Beach reveals itself almost at the last second. The entrance is the first clue. A tight passage between limestone rocks, just a few meters wide, around 10 feet, forces you to squeeze through before the space suddenly opens up into a small, enclosed beach. It's compact, surrounded by cliffs on both sides, which makes it feel more private than it actually is. And the scale is different here. The beach itself is only about 100 meters long. That's roughly 330 feet. But the waves roll in with surprising power, making it popular with surfers when conditions are right. What stands out, though, is how everything is framed. Cliffs above, ocean ahead, and no clear view beyond the edges. It feels contained, and that sense of enclosure makes the next location feel completely different. White limestone cliffs drop sharply into clear turquoise water at Melasti Beach, creating one of the strongest color contrasts on the island. A winding road cuts down through the rock, descending about 100 meters, that's roughly 330 feet, from the plateau above. And that road is part of the experience. Sharp turns, steep drops, and walls of white stone on both sides make the approach feel almost cinematic. At certain points, the ocean appears suddenly between the cliffs, getting closer with each turn. At the bottom, the space opens up completely. Wide, flat shoreline, bright sand. Water that stays relatively calm compared to other southern beaches, especially during low tide. But there's another detail that's easy to miss: ceremonies. This beach is still used for traditional purification rituals, particularly before major holidays, which adds another layer to what you're seeing. And as open as this place feels, the next location takes a completely different direction. Kelingking Beach sits on the island of Nusa Penida, about 25 kilometers, that's roughly 15 miles, off the coast of Bali. From the viewpoint above, the cliff curves outward in a way that resembles the outline of a T-Rex head, which is where the name comes from. And from up there, it looks manageable, but the path down tells a different story. A steep descent of around 400 meters, that's over 1,300 feet, follows a narrow, uneven trail along the cliff face. Some sections are reinforced with wooden rails. Others are just carved into the rock. It's slow, careful, exposed. And at the bottom, the beach feels almost isolated. High cliffs block most of the view, and the waves hit with enough force to make swimming risky on many days. So most people stay above. But from that vantage point, you start to realize something. This isn't just a beach. It's a formation that only really makes sense when seen from a distance. Diamond Beach sits on the eastern side of Nusa Penida, and reaching it involves a steep descent of about 150 meters, that's roughly 500 feet, along a staircase cut directly into the rock. In some sections, the steps are narrow and uneven, with rope handrails guiding the way down. And that descent is part of the experience, because from above, the view is all about geometry: sharp cliffs, isolated rock formations rising out of the water, and waves breaking in perfectly spaced lines. But at the bottom, it feels completely different. Bright white sand replaces the darker tones from earlier beaches, and the cliffs rise almost vertically behind you, creating a space that feels both open and enclosed at the same time. The water looks calm at first glance, but the currents here can be strong, and conditions change quickly, which is why most people stay near the shore. What stands out most is the contrast: sharp rock, soft sand, deep blue water. And as striking as this place is, the final location takes a completely different direction, moving away from cliffs and into something far more remote. Located about 10 kilometers, that's roughly 6 miles, off the northwest coast of Bali, this island is part of a protected national park. There are no large resorts here, No busy roads, no crowds moving from one viewpoint to another. Instead, the focus shifts entirely underwater. Coral walls drop sharply just a few meters from the shore, creating depth almost immediately. Fish move in dense groups, and in certain areas, you can spot reef sharks or sea turtles passing through. But what makes this place stand out isn't just the marine life. It's the stillness. Compared to everything you've seen before, this feels slower, more controlled, almost untouched. And standing here, looking out across the water, it becomes clear how different each part of the island and the surrounding region can be. Because what started as a single destination turned out to be something far more varied than it first appeared. And that's Bali. From quiet temples and rice fields to waterfalls, volcanoes, and the open ocean. Each place feels different, and that's exactly what makes it work. Not one highlight, but the variety. And together, it creates something that's hard to compare.